Today's world calls for exceptional skills to be able to adapt and to change to meet the requirements. And part of that is disrupting yourself. That's something you want to do. And what do we mean by that? Well, it kind of goes back to a wonderful book from years ago called The Innovators Dilemma, written by Clayton Christensen. He's a professor at Harvard and is kind of led in this. And a person who has worked with and works with him is joining us, who wrote this wonderful book. Now, here, I got it on my iPad, called Disrupt Yourself. And her name is Whitney Johnson, and she joins us right now. She's right there in Harvard University. Whitney, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You have written a fabulous book. I love what you've got here. The concept is disrupt yourself, as I'm showing here, and it's the idea that we have to change a little bit. Tell us kind of in a capsule Reader's Digest point of view, what the book is about and what it means in today's world to someone who's working and trying to get ahead.
Yeah, okay, so we'll start with the Reader's Digest version, which is companies don't disrupt, people do, and here's how in 7 steps. So that's your Reader's Digest for the book.
Sounds good to me.
But going into a little bit more detail is we've had these frameworks of disruption that have really informed a lot of business thinking and strategy for basically the last now almost 20 years, which is this idea of a low-end or new market innovation like an Amazon or an Uber goes in at the low end of the market. People are pretty dismissive of it. The quality's not actually very good. And yet over time, as they pursue quality, they get better and better and better, and they eventually upend the industry like Amazon did to Borders. And we now see Uber really doing to the yellow cab industry. And so I took this framework that we have seen and we've applied to companies and products and services and said, okay, but doesn't this actually also apply to people? Isn't it possible, and isn't it even more important that we figure out how to start at the low end with our career, climb to the top, and then be willing to upend our career, because we live in times where disruption is accelerating. And so for us as individuals, if we have the skill to actually disrupt ourselves without being disrupted, we will be able to have a competitive advantage. So what I have done with this book is said, all right, let's take these frameworks, but let's revisit them with the individual in mind and see what they look like when applied to us as people.
Yeah, I like the way you do that, and I've actually recommended that to people because even since I've read your book, and by the way, I read it 3 times. It is that good, and I really enjoyed it, and I've been recommending it to people that are going through some challenges in their career, wondering which way to go. I was talking to someone, a daughter of a good friend of mine that I graduated from high school with, and she was wondering, where do I go with my husband? We want to get jobs here, doing this and that. And I said, you got to get this book. It'll help you to see what it's like, because you take the great concepts and elements that we learned from Clayton Christensen about how companies do this and really bring it down to the individual. And so what I want to do is go over some of the concepts that you talk about, looking at the book that you have there. What I want to do is go into this and take a look at what is out there and the kinds of things that you mention when you use it, so that we can see what's happening here as we do it. Let me use this technology, and using the technology here, we can jump in, and now you can see on the screen your book, Disrupt Yourself. And What I want to do is pull up some of these bookmarks. I bookmark a bunch of this, going through it and seeing the really good things that you put in there. As I look at the information that you have here, I like the way that you talk about in the introduction. Here we look at the psychology of disruption, mentioning what it's all about with the S curve that you talk about, and particularly you mentioned 7 variables that can speed up or slow down the development as we go through this. Now, there's a whole bunch of them here, and those of you that are watching this, you want to learn about this for your career, for your company, and to advance it, and for yourself. So if you're working with a company, these are going to be very important for your own advancement in your career. If you're a solopreneur, or you're the owner, these are very important. So what I want to do is look at some of these, taking the right risk, playing to your distinctive strengths, embracing constraints, and I particularly want to address that one. I like what you said about embracing constraints. What do you mean by that?
Well, so constraints. I mean, whenever you're starting something new and you're trying to start a new job or start a new company, etc., you're going to have a couple things. Number one is you're going to have this need to get a lot of information. You want to know how you're doing, right? And so one of the best ways to figure out how you're doing is to impose constraints, because constraints, you bump up against them. And so one image that I think of that helps me figure out what exactly I mean when I say that, as a skateboarder. So skateboarders are considered some of the fastest learners in the world because they receive incredibly fast and useful feedback. Like every action, every move gives them information. And so it's the same for us. Whenever we're trying something new, if we have constraints, if we don't have enough money, if we don't have enough time, if we don't have enough resources generally, which could be buy-in from the people around us, it forces us to make decisions and also work with what we have. And as we're bumping up against, okay, I only have $100 to try this, I'm going to get a lot of information pretty quickly because I have to. And so if I'm willing to look at that constraint of only having $100 as opposed to the $1,000 or the $100,000 I want, and say, okay, how can I get information from this? And I'm willing to embrace that, then the constraint actually becomes a tool that helps me get the information that I need to figure out how I'm doing. And so as I embrace that constraint, I'm actually able to get the traction I need to move up my learning curve. So instead of a stumbling block, in fact, it's something that pulls me forward.
Yeah, I like the way you put that because and we all hit the constraints and we go, oh no, I want to avoid those. But
Right,
as I was reading
right.
your book, I realized, wait a minute, welcome them,
Yeah.
welcome those constraints, welcome the challenges that are going to come because, well, we become better people out of it. Kind of like the thought that came to my mind, and I'd be interested in your reaction, is if you really want to build strength, say in your arms, you do push-ups. Okay, you
Exactly.
do it in a medically sound way, do it in a smart
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
and if you do it right, you're going to actually feel the pain. You're doing
Right.
that, but it makes you stronger. It seems like that would be a proper metaphor. What do you think?
Absolutely. In fact, we think about, I mean, to carry that a little bit further, we think about this idea of it must be really great to be an astronaut and to be weightless. But in fact, when they're weightless, their muscles go flaccid. And so they lose all of their strength. And so I think that that's actually a very apropos metaphor and something that we really take for granted because we live in a world that has gravity. But in fact, we do need those constraints, and they give us information. They require us to make decisions about what we're going to do in terms of what order, and so they're actually very, very valuable and
Yeah, I like that.
unavoidable and
Yeah,
unavoidable.
yeah, I like that. And I like the way that you say that because it makes sense that we can say, okay, we're going to hit them. Don't try to avoid those things, but instead
Right.
embrace them and realize, hey, we can become even better when we do that because we're
Yeah.
going to be able to do it. Matter of fact, jumping over here to page 71 on my electronic version of it that I had, I like what you talked about here when you said to turn the stumbling blocks into stepping stones. And you've got a bunch of good things here, but I
Mhm.
particularly want to zero in on number 4 here, where you said, I thought this was brilliant wording, reframe to can if. Tell us what you mean by can if thinking.
Yeah. Okay. So this actually is hat tip to Mark Barden, who wrote a book called A Beautiful Constraint. He and his colleague did, because I thought that was really helpful. So basically, to look at a situation and say, okay, I can build this business if I have X, Y, or Z, or I can be successful in this job if I have X, Y, or Z. And so instead of saying I can't if only, or I could if only I had, it's I can if. And so you reframe it to ask yourself, what do I need, or what do I need to figure out? And it becomes a challenge. I think we all know people who get into a situation and they say to you, okay, they're going to tell me no, but I'm going to figure out how to get them to tell me yes. And we marvel at their ability to do that. They're very resourceful with their words. And I think it's very similar for us as well, where we can just say, no is to know. It's just, how do I work with this? And so I can do this if I figure out that. So I think it's a very powerful reframing of the question and of the challenge.
Yeah, I think that's important. And one of the things that you addressed that I thought was particularly good is sometimes we're going to see a challenge and we feel like, okay, we're entitled to certain things. Here in chapter 4, you talked about battling entitlement and the
Mhm.
innovation killer. Yeah, I think that was important. Talk to us a little bit about how having that entitlement mentality can really kill innovation.
Yeah, so entitlement, the thing that's interesting about entitlement is number one, it comes in a lot of guises. So it's really easy for us to say, oh, millennials are really entitled. Wow, I'm so glad she addressed this in the book. But the fact is that you can be entitled whether you're a millennial or you're a boomer, and whether you're starting a job or you're, at the top of your career. And in fact, the research shows that the more successful you are, whether financially or career-wise, the more entitled you become because you believe that you deserve what you have. So, and that becomes a real killer, because as you begin to see, the fruits of taking the right kinds of risks and playing to your strengths, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to work really hard and I'll get this, you start to think, I deserve what I have. And the minute we start to believe that we deserve what we have, we stop trying, we stop being grateful. And so we get to this point where we can actually stall along the curve and more importantly, create this toxicity that pushes us back down the curve. And so we no longer have that momentum. And so that at that crucial place where we should be going the fastest, if we'll battle entitlement, we will continue to do that. But if we don't, it actually has the ability to push us back down.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that we don't hear a lot about, but that's one of the things I loved about the book, that you mentioned so many things that we think, okay, we really should do these kinds of practices, embracing that and learning from some of the challenges that are going to be there and the problems. Like, matter of fact,
Yeah.
over here, one of the things you talked about, I'm going to get, if you don't mind, you touched me personally on this in a very positive way when you shared something that was rather personal. You talked about jettison shame, and use that, and you share at a time when you were speaking and you bombed. And I think as a professional speaker myself, I can relate to that. Hey, we all have done that. Anyone that's been speaking a lot has probably done that at least once in there.
Yeah.
And I like what you said here. You said, I once bombed a speech. By the time I finished, I was perspiring so much, it looked as if I had just run 3 miles. And then you say down here, frequently applaud failure in theory. Yeah, theory, it's easy. But the dirty little secret is that it makes all of us feel at least a little ashamed. So what I want to ask you is, for those that have either directly bombed in speaking or some other things, how can we go about jettisoning shame, and how can we go forward with what we're going to do that's going to turn that problem, that shame of bombing in a speech or something else, into a real positive?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is that when something doesn't go the way that we want it to do, I think it's really easy for us to try to hide it and not acknowledge it. And I think one of the aspects that's important and very often overlooked is the willingness to say, you know what, this didn't work, and I'm really sad. I'm sad, and I'm sort of devastated, and this dream that I had of being this conquering hero, it didn't happen. And so that's actually part of it, is to acknowledge and own the feeling of sadness around the situation that didn't work. And then once you're able to do that, you're willing to own that feeling of being sad. It allows you to also recognize that this doesn't in any way change your fundamental worthiness, to use a term that Brene Brown uses, is that it's not the having mess something up that actually pushes you down the curve. It's the shame that you might feel about it, and this sense that I am no longer somehow worthy because it didn't work. Now, here's the trick, and this is something that I talk about in the book, is that we are taught from a very, very, very young age that our identity is inextricably linked to our successes. And so part of the reason that if you know that, if I know that my identity is tied to my success, then I can start to say to myself, okay, I'm feeling ashamed because my identity is tied to my success, but I know that that is a fallacy. So if I start becoming aware that that's a fallacy, then I can say, so the shame that I'm feeling isn't about me, it's societal. It's sort of, I've been taught this. Then you can start, once you start intellectually understanding it, then you can start to emotionally feel it and say, all right, the shame is not about me. I'm sad, it didn't work, but if I do not allow myself to be sad, and I allow myself to succumb to the shame, the energy and the passion and the animation that I feel about this idea goes away. And I need that in order to get on the curve again and to continue climbing. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I come out on this.
Yeah, and I have to agree with that. I think that's wonderful. It's hard to do it, though, when we're in the midst of that. Oh, my goodness, I did this. Holy moly. How am I going to get over this kind of thing? We feel real bad, but I think you hit the nail on the head. That's one of the things I really like about your philosophy and the way you talk about it in the book, is that first of all, we intellectually understand. Here's what you did. Okay.
Right.
Also, you don't use these words, but it's like, okay, you too are human. Yes, you're a human being.
Right.
And then we get over that by having those two premises. We can say, all right, I'm going to emotionally be able to overcome that as well. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And I think another way to, the other thing I would say is that we can also start getting over it by being willing that when the people around us make mistakes, to let them make mistakes. And we can start with the people who work for us and with loved ones. And as we practice not making them feel ashamed for mistakes they made, simplest thing is like spilling milk, then as we practice that, then we can kind of practice on ourselves. And it's something that we can over time develop.
Yeah, exactly. It's a learned skill. It's something we work on and are able to overcome and
Right.
work with it. Now,
Right.
here's something else that I wanted to ask you about, because you hit a chord that something has been concerning me for a while. And I love what you're saying here. A part where you talk about you can't see the top of the curve from the bottom. And you said something that I have to agree with you on, but I've got a question. Where you
Yeah.
say here, meanwhile, volunteer work led to my connection with Clay Christensen and founding the investment firm Rose Park Advisors, where the two of you have worked.
Yeah.
And when clambering up a new learning curve, you simply cannot know what is going to come next. And I have to agree with you and put exclamation marks by that.
Right.
But I have a question. It's like we all are confronted with possibilities for volunteer work. And we all
Right.
know, yeah, it's good to do that because, hey, a lot of serious business can come from that, a lot of good. But I want to find out from you, Whitney Johnson, you've written a wonderful book. It's great. How do you filter? How do you know which volunteer projects to go, yes, I'll do that, versus others when you go, that would be nice, but I don't have enough time or money
Right.
or energy to do that. What kind of filtering mechanism do you use?
Okay, so that's a great question. I think in this particular instance, it was easier because it was through my church. And you know, when you live a religious life, if you're asked to do something, you do it. So you kind of don't filter it, you just do it. But to answer your bigger, I mean, I guess that is one question, right? I sort of say if it's something religious related, then it's a higher priority than if it's not. So I guess that is one of my filters. Another filter is it, you know, with people that I enjoy, is it something that I feel like, kind of going back along the curve, right? Is it something where I will be especially valuable and helpful? So for right now, we're having this big community nativity exhibit in my big community, in my small community of Lexington, Virginia. And one of my jobs is to go out and connect with people in the community. Well, I like to do that. I'm good at it. I'll be helpful in that regard. So do I like the person? Is it something that plays to my strengths, and does it go along with my values? And is the person who's asking you, and maybe this is somewhat mentoring, but are the people who are asking me to help a cause that I feel strongly about? Like if it's, you know, women and investing in women, I feel really, really strongly about that. There are other causes that are incredibly worthy, but I don't necessarily feel connected to them. And so that doesn't make sense for me to volunteer in that way. So there's got to be, again, an emotional connection. There's got to be something that plays to my strength, and then it has to play to my values.
Yeah, I
and
like
I have
the
to
way
have time.
Yeah, that makes sense, and thank you. That's very important. I think for each person, it's like you need to develop that set of filtering. For you,
Right.
it follows along with your spiritual views and your religion.
Right.
That's
Right.
important to you, and so it's like you've already got that made. And if someone says, "Hey, would you do this and this," which would be, say, not aligned with that, you can politely say, "Thank you for asking, but no, thank you."
Right.
Very easily,
Exactly.
and there's no question about it. And it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be really good to set up those filtering mechanisms for each person individually on what is right and what is wrong for them
Right.
beforehand, so that then when the requests come, you could say, that one is a good choice. Yes, I will volunteer there. This one, that's not for me, and maybe recommend someone else, or just say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Would that be?
I think you hit, yeah, and I think you hit on something important, is that sometimes you want to say yes because you care about the person who's asking, and they know that you do.
Yeah.
And so by being able to say to them, you know what, I want you to know that I care about you. I can't do it because I can't allocate the time that I would need to, but here's someone who I do think would be interested and be helpful to you. I think I love how you said that, because then you're focusing on the relationship and finding a win-win, and I think that's a really important thing to be able to do.
Yeah, because I think there are a couple issues going on there. One is, here's the offer that you have. You could work with them, and also you can't say yes to everyone. You can't say no to
Right.
everyone. So we need
Correct.
some kind of idea and some filtering criteria, but also there's a relationship there. Is this
Yeah.
a person you don't know from out of the blue? They're asking you this, and you're thinking,
Right.
you don't know me, there's no relationship,
Yeah.
versus someone who you really dearly care about. You know they genuinely need help. They're asking you to do it. Okay, that might be a different situation.
Right.
And so thank you. That really helps me a lot. And
Good,
so
good.
as I look at your book, it's the kind of thing, I mean, we could go on for about
I
4 or
know,
5
I know,
hours.
I know, I know, I know. It would be
Because
fun.
what you talk about here, Whitney, is so important. It's disruption. Again, I'm going to go back and put another plug in here for Glade. I read his book back in 2000. I think he wrote it in 97.
Yep, yep.
Looking at my notes, and I went back and reread it, and I realized how appropriate it was for a corporate environment, for organizations. And now you have taken those concepts, you've modified them and updated them for today's world, for our own personal career. And I think that is so important. So I want to thank you. But I'm going to go back here to your book one more time and be able to do this. I love the fact that we can share the screen here and use
Yeah, it's fantastic.
technology has been working pretty well. So when the technology works, it's good. And we are happy that it does work that way. Whoops. And I might be speaking too soon. No, there it goes. Okay, we got to hear it. Now, this is in your afterword. The last paragraph you put in there, I thought it was a great way to kind of tie the ribbon on the package and put it there. And I'd like you to expand on this, if you would, where you say, like a novice trapeze artist, letting go of the old to leap to the new, we are sure to experience a moment of mid-air terror. Hey, we all have gone through that. But we are far less likely to fall if we fling ourselves onto the next curve. And in the seemingly terrible moment of transition, your dreams, the engine of disruption, will buoy you. And are you ready to jump? Tell us a little bit more about that, what we'll need to do, and why we should go out there and jump.
It's a great question. And I think really the fundamental why of having written this book is that I think about, for me, that one of the most important things for me, one of my values, if you will, is to always move from stuck to unstuck, like to always move forward. And I also know from the psychology of disruption that when you get to a top of a curve, you can do things automatically, but you no longer are enjoying the feel-good effects of learning. And we have to feel the feel-good effects of learning, those neurotransmitters, in order to truly feel alive. I mean, progress is a human imperative. And so what I would say is that when you get to the top of a learning curve, you've learned as much as you can, whether as a corporation, whether as an individual. You can stay there, but if you do, there's no such thing as standing still. Your plateau will become a precipice. So the only real option is to jump to a new curve. And while it is scary and it is terrifying, it is that jumping, and it's a willingness to keep going to new curves, which is what allows us to feel alive, and which is what allows us to progress as individuals. And that is what we crave, that as human beings, and we need that. And so for me, it's really, it's something that we have to do. And so really the purpose of this book is to get people to believe that they have to do it, and then to not be quite as scared, and to say to themselves, all right, I know I need to do this, or I know I got pushed off the curve, but now I have a framework. Now I have a mechanism to help me manage this change. And because I have that, I'm not quite as scared as I was. And so if people feel that way, then I will be so happy, because then they can move forward.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, embrace that fear and you'll be able to learn. And you make a sound case with really good examples, scientifically based on here's what can happen and how it can really work when you disrupt yourself. It's something that the book addresses. As a matter of fact, here it is. Again, it's called Disrupt Yourself. You want to get this book and read it, particularly if you want to move ahead in your career today, because these principles are sound and you have to do it. If you think, well, I'm going to sit back and, hey, I've had pretty good success, I'm going to sit here and just enjoy what I've done. Well, I hope that the people saying that are my competitors. Because
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
you don't have to. But if you're my competitor and you're watching, just relax. Do not disrupt yourself. And matter of fact, do not buy this book. Okay, I don't want you to do that if you're my competitor. But for everyone else, this is something. It's a concept, Whitney, that is so important. And I want to thank you on behalf of those who are reading your book and who will read your book for putting that out there. Any final words? Any final admonitions you want to give us before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I would say, as I said before, companies don't disrupt, people do. And so this is really applicable to you as an individual. And as you apply these principles and ideas, it will make a difference for your organizations as well. And I think the last thing I would say is just dare to disrupt your status quo, and
good.
dream your very own dreams, and then go out and do them. And so, yeah, I would end with that.
Well, I think that is great. Now, of course, we're not going to let you get away before. No, reach through the screen here, twist your arm a little bit. Tell us how people can get in touch with you, how they can get the book when they want to, not if, but when they decide to go out there and get that.
Yeah. Well, you can get it. You can certainly buy it on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles, etc. You can buy it on Audible. There's a Kindle version. There's a hardcover version. You can find me at whitneyjohnson.com. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnsonWhitney. And then you can just email me at whitney@whitneyjohnson.com. So any of those ways you can get in touch with me.
Excellent. For those that are listening on audio, please spell very slowly because some might not be native English speakers. How do we spell Whitney and even Johnson?
Okay, Whitney, WHITNEY at Whitney Johnson, JOHNSON.
All right. Whitney Johnson, wonderful to have you here. And thank you, dear listener and viewer and reader, for being with us today. I'm Terry Brock, and go out and disrupt yourself.